Illinois and the country await a big labor ruling, and the next executive director of the Democratic Party of Illinois will be chosen by a committee of women. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. With me today to talk about, kind of post-legislative session, middle of campaign that goes on forever in Illinois. Charlie Wheeler is back. He is director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois Springfield. Longtime Chicago Sun-Times reporter at the State House before that. Welcome back, Charlie.
Thank you, Bernie. It's always fun to be here, particularly to rehash all this stuff.
and Dave Dahl is here, State House reporter for WTAX Radio in Springfield.
Fun.
Well,
I agree.
Fun it is. Okay, the Janus case. Mark Janus is a state worker that lives in Springfield. We thought that this last week the U.S. Supreme Court might have finally decided if a person like Mr. Janus, who doesn't want to pay union dues, but because of a freedom of speech issue, he says, and only pays what the unions call fair share dues because he doesn't want to be a member of the union at the state, if that has to be in the future, or if all such agreements across the country will go away because the Supreme Court says it should. It looks like a decision might come within the next 2 weeks. It could come as early as Monday. Charlie, your thoughts on this case, which could be a signature achievement of Governor Bruce Rauner if the conservative Supreme Court of the United States goes that way and decides that fair share dues are not appropriate.
Okay, let me preface it by saying that I am not an unbiased observer in this. I'm a lifetime member of the Chicago Newspaper Guild. I'm a member of the faculty union out at UIS. And I think the argument that Janus and others are making is that, well, we don't want to support the union because we don't agree with their positions. The law requires the union to separate money that's used for campaigning from money that's used to pay for the costs of negotiating a contract, working with grievances, all the other things involved aside from the political aspects. But Janus and others argue you can't really divorce it because it's all political because it's in the public sector. And I think people who would argue that way and at the same time expect the union to negotiate a contract from which they will benefit, I think they're being hypocritical. And if they wanted to be honest about it, they'd say, okay, I'm not going to pay union dues, but by gosh, when it comes time to negotiate the contract or when I have a grievance, I'll hire my own lawyer. Or I'll go out and I'll negotiate directly with Governor Rauner for how much money I should get. See how far you get with that.
I think I understand your point. Hey, let's talk about, and it might be a little early for this, but political implications. Governor Rauner has said this could be the biggest achievement of his first term because he was the one who originally brought this lawsuit. And it was determined in court that he didn't have standing. He's not a state employee. He's the guy that oversees state employees. So then Mark Janus was brought into the case, became the plaintiff, and it now has made it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And we talk about federal issues when I open this show. This could be a decision that affects unions across the country. Would this, given Illinois, it's a bluish state, would this be a big plus for Governor Rauner if he gets his way on the Janus case?
Well, I think it would be. The governor has said all along that one of his parents or grandparents was in a union or something, and I'm not anti-union, but he certainly knows the dance steps. And a lot of the Governor Rauner turnaround agenda that he had when he came into office was about having local control or local decision making on whether public employees should be in a union. The idea being it would be easier to push the unions down if that were the desire of those local areas. And the governor had a 44-point agenda, and he's pretty much 0 for 44 on it. I know he claims a couple of victories there, but nevertheless, he would be able to get the Supreme Court of the United States to do what he and the people who support him have not been able to do now in 4 years, to weaken the influence of unions. And now, with a conservative-leaning court, now that we've waited to get the 9th justice on the court until Donald Trump is elected president, it could be a victory for the governor in a big way with ramifications nationwide. I don't know if it would destroy the unions, but it certainly would be a terrible position
Well,
for the union.
It certainly hurts the bottom line if people that don't want to. There can't be a closed shop anymore if Janice wins. That you can't, meaning if you're in a bargaining unit but you work at a place that has a union and you don't want to join, you don't have to pay anything. You don't have to pay what the unions call the fair share fees. So
That would be the implication of it. And I would argue again that I think that that's kind of a double standard, and I think people who do that are kind of cheating. They want all the benefits, but they don't want to pay for it. You know.
I think we know where you're coming from, and
Oh, sure. I make
no
bones about
and there's
it.
a
I make
union
no
organization
bones
at my
about
paper
it.
too, although we haven't yet voted on a contract. And I have been a part of that. So we'll just go forward and see where this goes. It could happen within a few days.
Yeah.
That's right. There have been a couple other on the labor front. There have been a couple other issues in the state. The appellate court heard arguments this week, 4th District Appellate Court in Springfield. If the largest state employee union, AFSCME, is at impasse in its negotiations over a new contract with Governor Rauner. The contract expired in mid-2015 during Rauner's first term. There's been no contract since. The governor wants to impose conditions as if it is at impasse, and the union says no, it shouldn't be considered that way. So we should go on just as the contract was in the past. So we will get a decision on that coming down the pike. There was another thing that happened in the last week. The Illinois Labor Relations Board determined that step increases for about 15,000 AFSCME people in their first 7 or 8 or 10 years are supposed to get step increases. Governor Rauner quit paying those because he said we don't have a contract. The union says you should keep paying those because conditions shouldn't change when there's when nothing changes and the contract runs out. And so the Labor Relations Board has said, move forward and pay these step increases that you owe people for the last 3 years. And that could come to about $415 million, which was not put into the budget. So what does that mean, Charlie?
Well, I suspect that we won't get a final resolution because the governor will probably go to court. And as in the case you alluded to earlier, over the impasse, whatever the trial court says, whatever the appellate court says, ultimately it'll be the 7 people on the Illinois Supreme Court who will have the final say. And the timing of it will be after the next gubernatorial election before a final resolution is reached. And presumably if the successful gubernatorial candidate is J.B. Pritzker, a Democrat, then the state will just bow out, and that'll be the end of it, and pay the money that's owed.
Of course, then they have to find the money, which is always an issue.
That's always the case.
And we'll see where that goes.
So get in line with everybody else.
Yeah, and we'll get to some campaign talk in a minute, but I also mentioned as we open the show that there's been some movement on the Me Too situation. Mike Madigan has, after the recent departure of his chief of staff, Tim Mapes, longtime chief of staff who was accused of making some comments and not passing along with adequate importance or at all some complaints about abuse within the caucus or the staff. There's a new chief of staff, Jessica Basham, and she and Speaker Madigan say they will hire a human resources director and an equal employment opportunity officer to ensure 200 employees in the Speaker's office fair, equitable, and unbiased work environment. And also, the Speaker has appointed all 18 women in the Democratic states. Speaker Madigan is also chairman of the Democratic Party of Illinois, of course, and Tim Mapes was also executive director of the party. So now there's a search committee for a new executive director of the party, and it is all 18 women on the Democratic State Central Committee plus 4 other women, and they are going to make that choice. One of the people who says she would like to be executive director of the party, we'll see if that would happen, is Elena Hampton, one of the women who complained about one of Madigan's workers, who was then a guy named Marty Quinn, who was released from service for any Mike Madigan enterprise on the political side. And then that Mr. Quinn, whose brother is an alderman in Chicago, put out a big report this week calling it the truth and saying he was basically wrongly accused and some things Elena Hampton had said were wrong. So we still have this kind of mess. We're still talking about the Me Too movement. It's still, and I know Charlie, you have thoughts on this, concentrates on the Democratic Party of Illinois and Democratic caucus led by Speaker Madigan. Your thoughts on long-term kind of changes that this will bring or implications?
Well, I think some of the steps that have been outlined are stuff that should have been done a long time ago. Having a human resources director, for example, codifying some of the standards similar to what you might find in private enterprise. But one of the things that I'm waiting for is waiting for the other shoes to drop. And the reason I say that is all the focus has been on the House Democratic Organization, Madigan's basically machine. But from my time watching the legislature, unless things have changed dramatically in recent years, being boorish, being jerks, being obnoxious was not limited to one caucus in one house. It was pretty much universal. Everybody had these, for want of a better term, or for want of for having to be, what would you say, genteel in my language, had these kind of bad eggs in their caucuses.
That was a nice way to say it on
Yeah.
television. We appreciate that. We don't have a beep button here that I'm aware
I know,
of.
I know. But yeah, that kind of stuff is just despicable, and it went on back then, and it goes on now, obviously. But I'm guessing it's not isolated in one particular group. It's both sides of the aisle, across the rotunda.
Right. Dave, one just little development in this, Mike Casper has been a longtime lawyer for Speaker Madigan. He now took over for Tim Mates as treasurer of some of the political committees that the Speaker runs. Governor Rauner's people, jumped on that. Oh, look at that, Mike Casper, the lawyer. That just shows, because he argued against a case that would have, or a petition that would have brought a fair maps plan to redistricting in Illinois, that just shows, corruption of that side. Whereas defenders of Mike Casper say, hey, he's a good election lawyer and you want somebody like that overseeing the treasury of your campaign accounts. Any thoughts on that kind of back and forth?
Well, Mike Casper is pretty close to Mike Madigan, and there are a lot of people, and you said at the outset, will there be long-term changes, et cetera. Some people are not going to be happy until every trace of Mike Madigan, including Mike Madigan himself, is gone from the landscape. So, a lot of people are upset that, for example, the whole legislative inspector general process or the complaint process, it seems like you could argue that Speaker Madigan has his thumb on the scale. He's picked the people. Everything goes through him anyway. You talk about 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Well, look at the degrees of Mike Madigan and all the people in state government who can trace their livelihood or their political life back to him. So I think justifiably people could say, wait a second, Mike Casper might be a good guy, but he'd be no better than Mapes.
Yeah, but to me that's kind of failing to understand what the job is. You're the treasurer of the Democratic Party.
Or at least the Friends of Michael Madigan, a couple of the committees. I'm not sure if it's the party.
They're closely related.
Right,
but at any
certainly
event,
the
you're
committees
the
that help
treasurer.
Democrats.
So if I'm choosing somebody to be the treasurer of my enterprise, I want somebody who I can trust, somebody who's got a proven record, somebody who's on the same page as I am on all of this stuff. So of course he picked Mike Casper.
I don't have to understand it. It looks bad.
I know, but I'm just yeah, and I know that's part of the situation these days, I think, is that people don't want to try and understand things when they can quickly jump into their tribe and say, oh, this is bad.
Yeah, I would also, I've watched various hearings over the years of when candidates are challenged, petitions are objected to for candidates to get on the ballot. So it's a very difficult process. Both sides have some very good lawyers. They know the system. They know how things work, and there are so many traps, you can say, written in by both sides over many years.
Sure, it's
so
bipartisan.
having a good lawyer doing that stuff, Casper is one of those people, and so say what you will, both sides have people like that. So we'll see where it goes, but it is the political season, so
Yes.
we will continue on.
So Dave, you're right. It is the political season.
It's never not.
It's never not around here.
Unfortunately.
Charlie, I know that you have discussed this some in other forums, but when we talk about some of the allegations that have led to people leaving work in the legislature, like Tim Mapes, some off-color comments, some even of, in his case, there was never any allegation that he was assaulting anyone. He, said something about the color of somebody's bra once who was on staff, and that was one of the things, or didn't take seriously when it was alleged that a state representative made kind of a lewd comment to a couple of women on staff, suggestive comments. So there are various degrees of these things, and yet I know there's been a big story in Chicago about the Chicago public schools and staff members abusing students, and that has turned into a big story up there. And I know we are a couple hundred miles away as we tape this in Springfield, but your thoughts about that story and its implications?
Well, it seems to me, with all due respect to the legislative people who've come forward with valid claims, and they were treated in a shabby way, they were adults. I think it's particularly horrendous when it involves children, and it involves employees, teachers, administrators, coaches at the state's largest school district. And there have been dozens of cases recounted by the Tribune. I've said this before, Tribune should get a Pulitzer for its Betrayed series, shining a light on what goes on in Chicago public schools, how the incidences are not reported as they're required to the state, to the police, and how the same people who investigate are the people who then go into court and defend CPS against suits brought by the victims. So it's really a mess. And yeah, it's 200 miles from here, but as I said, with respect to the legislature, it's very hard to accept the notion that, only in Chicago does this occur. There's no problems anywhere else. There's no problems in the Quads or in Southern Illinois. Here in Springfield, we've never had that kind of thing, and we've never had situations where...
Actually, we've had a couple of recent cases
well,
that our newspapers brought out of just, people who have been on teaching staffs being
and I guess
fired
my message
for
would
these
be,
reasons.
don't just sit back and say, look at Chicago.
Yeah.
Pay attention to what's going on in your own community and check and see, well, what are the standards in my school district? Does this stuff get reported? Who investigates this? Who's there to counsel children who go through this horrendous abuse? And again, in my mind, doing something to an adult is horrible, but doing it to a kid is even worse.
Understood. I am going to shift gears a little. Dave, I think you covered a court hearing about House Bill 40, which is the law that Governor Rauner signed, is it last year already? That was created...
Time flies.
Yeah, it created a lot of anger among his conservative base on the Republican side, but it was the bill that extends abortion to Medicaid recipients and also people on state insurance. And so basically it's taxpayer-paid abortion, which goes, I guess, beyond any other state if you listen to the anti-abortion advocates, pro-life folks. So Dave, we had a hearing before the appellate court, and there's an argument being made by pro-life folks, including Peter Breen as a legislator and also works for the Thomas More Society, which is anti-abortion strongly, saying, well, there's no appropriation specifically for this procedure, so therefore the state shouldn't be able to spend the money on it. Your thoughts on that, and any idea when we'll have an opinion from that appellate court?
Last thing first, Representative Breen expects maybe early fall, if not late summer. He said the 4th District Appellate Court in Springfield has a custom of turning out the decisions relatively quickly, and I guess if you're in that circle, 2 months is relatively quickly. The arguments are the same that were made in the circuit court in 9th Street, Sangamon County, that the budget is not valid, it's not a proper budget, it's not balanced. When a law takes effect was messed up in there because the bill was signed at a certain point in time as opposed to when the fiscal year began. None of the argument is about abortion itself and whether it's moral. And you and Adams Housecat and I can all say plainly that the only reason that Representative Breen and his clients are there is because they don't want abortion to be legal. They don't want abortion to be paid for by tax dollars. But the argument is all budgetary, economical, legislative. On those grounds, the three of us can pick our least favorite part of the budget and sue and say, you didn't do a proper budget, get rid of this, that, or the other program.
Yeah. Was there any indication from the justices on where they might go by their questioning or anything?
Well, there were a lot of questions about why is this case even before us? The budget is $30-some billion. Do you expect us to vet the whole thing? You know, the budget bill is, 1,500 pages. Is that going to be litigated in court now? And I thought those were kind of interesting questions. And I'm not in court a lot, and I'm certainly not in the appellate court or Supreme Court very much. And you might think that was an indication that they weren't real sure they should even be talking about it. And I posed that, of course, to Representative Breen, and he said, "Oh no, the justices did a fine job and asked the right questions."
And we're just the ones that brought the lawsuit.
And of course, the other side of it, the Attorney General, they don't make themselves available for question and comment. So, you know, Representative Breen is optimistic. On the other hand, saying that any law is invalid because the General Assembly doesn't do budgeting correctly. You know, that's
might be a tough go.
It's a slippery slope.
Well, I've always, in my years of doing what we do, following things in the State House, I've always enjoyed Charlie Wheeler's questions when there's any budget briefing by any governor's office for the last few decades. Charlie, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, it strikes me that if you were to attack the Department of Healthcare and Human Services, for example, which oversees the Medicaid program, because now it would be paying
Healthcare and family.
yeah, what did I say? Human services. Yeah, healthcare and families.
Family services.
Family services, duh. But in any event, the people who oversee Medicaid, if you're attacking them because some of those dollars will be spent for abortions, how do you codify that? How do you rectify it? Medicaid budget doesn't say, it says how much for doctors, it says how much for hospitals, how much for nursing home care, how much for prescriptions, but it doesn't say here's how much to take care of people who have broken legs, here's how much to take care of people who have ruptured appendices, here's how much to take care of people who are victims of auto accidents. It's not broken out that way. So there's no way that you could strike a particular line that's dedicated for that purpose. And the notion that we have an estimate, all the years I covered the legislature, there were never formal estimates. Senator Howie Carroll, Chicago Democrat, who was the Senate Democrats' lead appropriations guy, used to get up, and this is a long time ago, and he'd say, the budget spends this much, or appropriates this much. We estimate this much, and his estimate would always be a couple dollars higher than what the budget was.
Just to be
and it
like
was. And the last time we did one was in the spring of 2014. We passed a budget estimate, a resolution, a joint resolution of the House. The House did it in April. The Senate agreed in May. The House did it in February. Senate agreed in March. We came back at the end of negotiating the budget, and suddenly we were spending like $1 billion more. So they passed a new budget resolution that jacked the revenue estimate by $1 billion, and it passed with good solid majorities in both chambers. So this notion of having an estimate when you start, I mean, it sounds nice on paper, but in reality, it's never worked that way.
Which is interesting, because that was the Republicans, as they started negotiating the budget weeks before the end of the legislative session, they made a big deal. They had a press conference. We must have a good revenue estimate. The governor was saying that. And then everybody kind of decided to get along and pass a budget. And the governor's going around the state to various places saying, we passed a budget, not perfect, but balanced.
It's only Representative Breen who's upset by this, and his allies.
Right. So anyway, it sounds like from what this says, not that we want to predict what a court will do, but may not look good for getting rid of House Bill 40 in this particular way. But we'll find out over time. Just a few minutes left. It is, as we say, continual campaign season. We've seen some online and/or TV advertising going on where the Pritzker people caught in, I think it was in Marion, the governor said something about, we're really happy about what the federal government is doing. So then they're putting out ads that Rauner is proud of what they're doing in Washington, and then they're showing pictures of or video of President Trump saying things like, there's good people on both sides, and
the Nazi issue.
The Nazi issue,
just misunderstood.
And then the governor. In his campaign, they put out Who Knew, showing Pritzker, J.B. Pritzker, the Democratic candidate, claiming in that nobody knew how bad Rod Blagojevich was, or that he was under investigation, when I was talking to him on those tapes that have come out through the Chicago Tribune's disclosures of tapes that were sealed in court. And I sound pretty bad, but who knew Blagojevich? And then they show all of these headlines from back then about Blagojevich being under investigation, and everybody should have known. So it's early, but Charlie, where's this one going? And can you tell which? I mean, Rauner is around $1 billion worth, and Pritzker is around $3.5 billion worth, and we're going to just see a lot of advertising, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. And I've suggested here and in other venues, the best thing for the state of Illinois that both guys could do would be to take all the money that they're going to be spending on advertising over the summer, when people by and large don't pay attention, donate it to charity.
Dave, any anybody catching the advantage as far as you can tell, or is it just that a lot of the eggs are negative at this point? I mean, Pritzker's also got one that's been running about a lot of news reports saying bad things about that happened during the Rauner administration.
Yeah, Pritzker can definitely make a case for Quincy, make a case for the back porch of the governor's mansion. Rauner's big play seems to be the Blagojevich tapes. In and of itself, JB and Blago on tape is a bad thing. That thread would go. And also JB telling Blago that Jesse White is the least offensive African American who can be appointed to the Senate. And they're laughing about Jeremiah Wright, et cetera. So that's where they're going now. You would think, of course, here anything goes, but you'd think, after Labor Day, they'd really retrench and reset, reintroduce themselves, and really try to make the case and get
in a positive way.
Yeah, well,
No, just bring out the really nasty
stuff.
stuff.
They've got enough money for all kinds of ads, and we're going to be seeing all kinds of ads.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, and we'll be watching that commercial TV once in a while. Charlie Wheeler, thank you. Dave Dahl, thank you. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.